How is DHL finding the road to net zero?
It's a challenge. I think the key challenge for us is just understanding which technologies are going to be the prevailing technologies at the end of the next two buying cycles, and what are the right steps to get there. And certainly there's not one right fuel or vehicle type for all types of transport requirements. So we have this complex matrix that says, for small final mile versus, large long distance, you have a number of options. But, what's interesting is that the vehicles seem to be in good shape. We're getting really good reliability, we're getting great driver feedback. So it's not so much the issue now about the vehicles we're running, it's about access to fuel and the fuel infrastructure. And, there's also some degree of uncertainty about how quickly that can develop to support the requirements.
So it's horses for courses. Just talk us through those different horses.
So for low mileage, low weight, final mile, obviously battery electric is an option, and we're on that journey. Albeit the abatement costs are very high, particularly because of the low mileage and the very high expense of the vehicles now. For the heavier end, then we are relying on bio-CNG and also bio-LNG. So typically we're running CNG on 4x2 tractors and bio-LNG on the heavier 6x2 tractors. And we're running those very successfully, again with good feedback from drivers and customers.
One of the things that people always talk about is infrastructure, by which they usually mean charging infrastructure.
Yes.
How are you finding that?
Well, where we've put battery electric vehicles in, we've put in our own charging infrastructure, and we're keeping them in a closed loop just so that it is manageable. We haven't taken the step to try and put these vehicles into a network where they may be making a number of journeys and returning. There just isn't the range yet. So it was a fair degree of publicity earlier this year about us bringing the first Volvo 4x2 tractors in, and so far so good. We're getting more than 200 kilometres out of them when we need it, but obviously it's early days, and we just have to see how that technology develops, and equally how the cost of it develops, because for now we've invested in those vehicles to learn. As they stand today, we don't see that as being a scalable solution from a cost perspective.
Of course, one of the advantages of DHL is that you're a big organisation. You can think strategically, you can plan strategically. Your buying cycle kind of works for you in that way. Whereas, as we know, most of the UK haulage sector is SME. And what they are struggling with is what type of alternative fuel, how much is it going to cost me? Probably 3 times more than anything else I'm buying at the moment. And what about the charging infrastructure? So does DHL feel their pain? And is there something that DHL would give in terms of advice to those small operators?
We obviously rely heavily on subcontract as part of our overall managed transport solutions. We can't do it all with our own fleet. We never set out to try and provide solutions in that way. So we are very open to working with our subcontract partners to help them on their journey to net zero. Where we can help with government lobbying or whatever it may be, we will take on board the messages we're getting back from our subcontract partners. But despite our scale, as I said at the outset, this is a challenge for us. So clearly it's a challenge for the whole industry, and I think we've got to get behind our industry bodies and make sure they're really clear about what's important to the operators, and that message is getting to government.
Talking to some German operators, they explain how the government in Berlin is subsidising at a very high level the move to net zero vehicles, and of course the UK government can't afford to do that, won't afford to do it. So what's your message to the UK government?
We would like to have some certainty around what fuels they are going to back for the road to net zero, and a clear roadmap and timing around how we get to net zero, and the evolution of diesel and biogas in that roadmap.
And from an RHA point of view, we'd absolutely agree with that. We've been calling for a roadmap from the government. What the government say back, which I'll put to you, is that, well, it's not really up to us. It's up to the industry to work out its own solutions from the manufacturers and the operators and everything else. It's over to you guys. How do you feel about that?
To a point, I agree that at the end of the day, we need to decide how we want to take this forward. However, we need to be clear about the legislative framework in which we're operating, and we need to be very clear about the duty regimes for future fuels and indeed the existing fuels. And I think the role of HVO, I think HVO clearly is a huge premium, but it's very significant in terms of carbon reduction. And I'm sure in working with government, we could do more as an industry to use that as a stepping stone until there's sufficient scale in fueling infrastructure and vehicles that were, on the new technologies, either gas or electric.
So that makes sense. So we just explore it a bit further. So HVO is basically a plug-in fuel, isn't it, where it works in diesel engines. It's not zero tailpipe, so the government doesn't really like it because they do want zero tailpipe emissions. But you're saying it's a good interim solution, yes, despite the fact that it's very expensive.
Well, if we're focusing on carbon reduction, it's a very quick step to get reduced emissions, albeit I accept you can't convert every diesel vehicle to HVO, but I believe there's real scope to increase the amount of HVO that's burnt quite quickly.
And what about supply?
Sorry, that was the point I was making. I think there's an opportunity to increase the supply of HVO significantly versus where we are today, because a lot of operators, including ourselves, have trialled it very successfully. The challenge that we're facing is just it's the cost challenge now that for ourselves or our customers, that we need to be certain that's the right step.
Good. Gavin, I'm not a magic man, but if I was and I could give you one wish, what would it be?
Real clarity around what that future abatement cost is going to be, and models for commercializing it. I think we're all facing that challenge as an industry.
Just explain models for commercializing it.
So in terms of ultimately making sure that all of the costs of that abatement of the CO2 is passed on to the end user, because ultimately that's where it needs to sit.
Great. Okay, Gavin, thank you very much indeed for talking to us.